is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassage and desireth conditions of peace. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciples. Now there are three pivotal verses that I want you to underline in this block of text. And we're going to talk about tonight going beyond being a fan. Going beyond being a fan. Three pivotal verses that I want you to underline, zero in on if you highlight in your Bible. I want you to underline verse 26, the end of verse 26, the end or the last phrase of verse 27, and the last phrase of verse 33. As students of the Bible, one of the things you learn along the way, and one of the things that's good practice, is to pay attention to any repetitions in the text. Yeah. Anything you see being repeated, anything you see being said once, twice, or three times, pay special attention, especially if those words are being uttered by the Son of God. Yeah. Anything that was worth Jesus repeating has to be worth us paying special attention to. Yeah. And on three different occasions in this block of text, he says, you cannot be my disciple. Three times. Now, Jesus acquired a lot of disciples in his life and in his ministry. But in this text, three distinct times, he says, you cannot be my disciples. We have a theology that urges and it's very aggressive in telling people how to be a follower of Christ. But I believe it is not only proper to let people know how they can be a follower of Christ, but to let the people who cannot follow Christ know that you cannot follow Christ. And I know it sounds weird because it sounds like everybody should be able to follow Christ. And everybody can be a follower of Christ. But according to Jesus himself, there were some people who he said cannot be his disciple. Now, in order to understand what's going on here, you have to understand the context, as we said. And the context actually begins with verse 15. And we're not going to read every verse, but I want to be educated, people of God, and understand. Now, I said some pretty strong things. It almost sounds heretical, almost look like an apostate. But before you draw a conclusion, hear the whole story. In verse 15, down through verse 24, Jesus tells a parable. And he tells a parable because there were people starting to follow him. And people would sit down and listen to his words. And he tells a parable about a man who had a great feast. And he said this man had a great feast, and he was sending his servant out, his messenger out, to invite people to this great party, this great feast. And all of the RSVPs that the master of the house had on the list is who the servant sent to first, so that they can invite or be invited to this great party. Well, the master of the house sends the servant out to all the RSVPs, and every RSVP, every person that the master of the house invited, one by one, gave an excuse for why they couldn't come to the feast. One person said, I've got oxen, I've got to prove it. Look in verse number 18. It says, and they all with one accord, one consent, began to do what? Make excuse. The first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must need. See, that's why I can't come to the feast. And another person said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. Another person said, I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So all of the people who this is a parable now. This means that Jesus is telling a story. All of the people that the master of the house invited, each one of them gave an excuse for why they could not come. Are you following me? Say amen. Amen. The story goes that the master then tells the servant, since the ones I invited made an excuse for why they couldn't come, I want you to go to the highways and to the hedges, and I want you to go into the far places, and I want you to invite everybody you can to come in to enjoy this party. Right. What he's actually saying is, since the original people who I invited made excuses for coming or for not coming, invite everybody. Yeah. Okay? Now, what was this really about that Jesus was saying? Please understand that when Jesus got here, he primarily came to and to minister to a certain group of people. Yeah. John chapter 1, verse 11 and 12 says he came unto his own, and his own received him not. Who was Jesus' own? Jesus was a Jew. So when he got here, he first came to the Jews. Yeah. But guess what? The Jews who had been looking for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, who had been looking for the King of the Jews, they rejected Jesus. Yeah. The ones he invited rejected Jesus. Yeah. So not only is the gospel the power of God unto salvation to the Jew first, but also to the Gentile. So Jesus was really setting the scene here. Now, quite naturally, with people listening to him, people would feel a certain call to be drawn to Jesus. So he's saying, he just gave this parable about the people who were invited making excuses. He just gave this parable that he sent his messenger to invite everybody in the highways and hedges to come in. So quite naturally, the people listening to him were drawn to him because he seemed very inviting. Just stay on the boat, stay on the boat. So quite naturally, as they heard, and the word began to spread, and hordes of people began to flock behind Jesus. You see this? Now, why would they do that? He just told a parable. Invite everybody to come in. Everybody? You mean to tell me this miracle worker is giving this parable, and in this parable, he's saying that the messenger invited everybody? You mean me? I'm crippled. I'm dragging my leg. You mean me? I'm an adulterer. You mean me? I'm a fornicator. You mean me? I'm blind. Do you mean me? I'm unclean. Do you mean me? I'm a publican. Do you mean me? And quite naturally, because of the open invitation implied in his parable, people that were listening to him began to draw to him. Yeah. Okay? Are you with me? Yes. Thus, verse 25. See, that's context. Yeah. And there went great multitudes with him. So watch this. He has this large crowd. And he's walking, he just told this parable, and hordes of people, dozens and dozens of people are walking behind him because this miracle working man just gave a parable, and in that parable he invited everybody to come in to the feast. Yeah. But Jesus stops and he turns around to this mass crowd and he does something very unique. Look at what the text says. Just stay with me. The text says that he turns to this crowd and says, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Now what Jesus does, though it looks successful for him to have a large crowd behind him, it looks successful for hordes and hordes of different people following him. Because if you look at the text, it did not just say a multitude, it said multitudes. Multitudes implies that there were a lot of different kinds of people. Yeah. That means there were a lot of crippled people. There were a lot of sinners. There were a lot of publicans. There were a lot of blind people. There were multitudes of people. That's a lot of people. It looks like a success to his ministry to have dozens and dozens of people following him. Yeah. But he stops, he turns around, and he says, if you don't hate your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, and love me, and you don't love me, you cannot be my disciple. Yeah. Now, what do you think is going to happen to that crowd? Watch the principle, okay? Because that's the history, but you need to watch the principle because some of you are very comfortable with the crowd. But you need to understand that what Jesus did in one instance, he reduced his crowd, no doubt. And you know how he reduced his crowd? He raised his standard. Now watch this, watch this. The church is for everybody. The Lord invites everybody to come in. That means everybody. I don't care how you dress. I don't care what part of town you live on. I don't care how many tats you got. You can be tatted up from head to toe. Everybody's invited to come in. Guess what? I don't care if you're a man thinking you're a woman or a woman thinking you're a man. And the church is for everybody. Are you hearing what I'm saying? I don't care if you smell like kush or weed or whatever. If you come in drunk smelling like alcohol. I don't care if you have a hygiene problem. I don't care if you have abuse in your history. I don't care if you just got out of prison. The church is for everybody. The invitation is for everybody. That means, let me tell you something. You can be living together and not married, and you're invited to come in. But watch this. Just as Jesus turns around after people come and raises the standard, Jesus does the same thing in his church. He says everybody is welcome to come in. But if any man come to me, watch the text. He says in verse number 26, if any man come to me. He just told a parable about everybody coming in. Now he's saying, if any man come to me, what is he saying? I have to be your primary relationship. Everybody say that. Primary relationship. Let me help you understand. See, I wanted to take my time, but I'm getting excited, right? Primary relationship is the relationship you have that regulates every other relationship that you're engaged in. All right? Do you understand that? Young people, holla at me. Your parents, right now, the relationship you have with your mom, your dad, your caretaker, your guardian, your big mama, whoever's taking care of you, is your primary relationship. Your friends are secondary. Watch this. Now, if your secondary relationship is beckoning you to do something, in order for you to really do it like you want to do it, you usually have to check in with your primary relationship. And if what they're asking you to do in your secondary relationship goes against what you got going on with your primary relationship, then you drop whatever secondary relationship you have, because before I let this go, I'd let this go. Does that make sense? So Jesus says, I have to be your primary relationship. He's not saying you got to hate and feel ill will for your father and your mother, but what he's saying is, if I'm your primary relationship, when father, mother, sister, brother ask you to do something, you run it through your primary relationship, and if you got to say no to somebody, it's not your primary relationship, it's your secondary relationship. Does that make sense? So he says, so watch this. He turns to this crowd and he says, if any man come to me, I see there's a lot of y'all behind me and you're following me, but if you're going to come to me and I'm not your primary relationship, you can't be my disciple. Now, you everybody say disciple. Okay, we're building this thing. We're building this thing. A disciple literally meant a person that was a sitter. Okay? A sitter, a learner, a student who literally sat under the tutelage of a teacher. On 3 different occasions, Jesus says you can't be a sitter.